Change the conversation in Washington. Congressman Jim Himes is the ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence's NSA and Cybersecurity Subcommittee. So thank you so much for joining us, Congressman. I guess, my first question is, when the Snowden revelations came out, the pendulum swung so far in the other directions, and people were so upset about the government potentially monitoring us and monitoring our data. Do you see the pendulum swinging back after this?
Well, unquestionably it will. And, sadly, after the Snowden revelations, frankly, the pendulum swung too far back. I can't tell you how many people I had to disabuse of the notion that the NSA was regularly listening in on their phone calls. But look, I think at the end of the day, the legislative process worked. We passed something called the USA Freedom Act, which dialed back some of the authorities in the Patriot Act, got rid of the metadata collection program, which, of course, was what everybody was primarily concerned about. But no, unquestionably, when people are fearful, as they are now, the pendulum does swing. And we just, as in everything else, our response to these terrorists, we need to sort of calm that fear and make sure we continue to kind of deal with this most technical of topics in a fairly calm and intelligent way. So
can you lay out some concrete ways you think that policy should change?
In the cybersecurity realm, I would say that we've got a lot of we can do at the government level, as we all saw from the OPM hack and the loss of that data, within the U.S. government, but also within companies like Sony, the list of which is long. There's an awful lot we can do to make our networks more secure. We're really only 5 or 6 years into an effort of really concentrating on this, and there's obviously a lot we can do there. And then individually, there's an awful lot we can do. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people I know who still regularly open up attachments from email addresses they don't recognize. And so there's an awful lot that we can achieve while we have that debate between security and civil liberties.
So you proposed something called an ENIVA convention. Can you explain what that is and what sort of progress you've seen there?
Yeah, the idea there is that, in the actual kinetic realm, as the military says, we do have rules of war. There are the Geneva Conventions, and, people understand what an act of war is. If you're in a war, what their obligations are to prisoners, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, even in the context of a war. In the cyber war realm, we don't have any of those norms. Nobody knows if, the stealing of data is an act of war. Is the shutting down of a network which doesn't hurt anybody an act of war? What about the shutting down of a network that does hurt somebody? And my point has been, and I've been sort of working this theme for a long time around here, we need to get together with the folks with whom we have a lot in common on the vulnerabilities of our networks and say, hey, let's at least set basic norms for what is an act of war, what kind of retaliation is okay. Now, mind you, that doesn't help us with the people who don't observe those laws, meaning, non-state actors and terrorists, but we ought to at least amongst the states in the world come up with a set of norms and agreement around what is what in the cyber realm.
So I just wonder, though, how do we find the right line, this balance between privacy and security and surveillance? I mean, it seems that the way we've been operating is very reactionary when really we need to be somehow getting ahead of these things.
It's a hard thing to do. I mean, as you pointed out, the pendulum does swing. Right after Snowden, everybody really thought wrongly that there was this massive surveillance apparatus that was targeting every American and listening to phone calls and reading mail. And now we're probably swinging back in the other direction. Look, this is a debate that we're not going to answer. As new technologies come online, I mean, 20 years ago, who imagined texting, Facebook, all these things? We're not going to win or end this debate. We just need to have it in good faith. And it's a difficult debate to have, of course, because many of the capabilities for surveillance are by nature secret. If people know about them, it's not particularly valuable surveillance anymore. So it's a very difficult debate to have, but it's an important one. And it's a line that I think if you look at both the original passing of the Patriot Act and then the dialing back of those authorities in the USA Freedom Act, that again, we won't get it right in any given piece of legislation, but it's important that we focus on maintaining two values, neither of which we want to sacrifice: security and, of course, the civil liberties we have.
Well, and on that last point, how do you address the fact that the vast majority of these communications are completely 1,000% innocent?
Well, yeah, and by the way, how do you address the fact that even if we wanted to go back to a world where, you know, the FBI could read all texts and all emails, and we would all agree, I think, that it would be good for them always to get judges' approval, to get warrants and that sort of thing. But hey, we're in a world now where you don't have to be all that intelligent a software developer to come up with an app that will allow for strong encryption that our intelligence agencies. So, you know, we're in a new technological world here that's going to require us to think differently about how we respond to new technologies.
Okay, Congressman Jim Himes from Washington, thank you.